the majority of Labour MPs will be hostile to Corbyn. The majority of them are on the right. They would call themselves moderates. I would call them pro-capitalist, right? So have they reconciled themselves to Corbyn? Absolutely not.
Het is zondag 8 december en dit is Linkse Hobby's, podcast van Authentiek Links. Vandaag hebben we een interview met Engelse communist Jack Conrad over Brexit, Noord-Ierland, de verkiezingen aankomende donderdag en nog veel meer. Blijf vooral luisteren. Verder wil ik nog kort een shout-out doen naar kameraad Andrew, die sinds afgelopen aflevering zich heeft aangesloten bij de groep donateurs die bij ons de lichtjes laten branden. Bedankt Andrew. Wil jij ons steunen? Kijk eens naar de mogelijkheden op linkse.media/doneren. Met een kleine bijdrage kunnen we onze plannen voor 2020 realiteit maken. En nu naar het interview. Pak er wat te snacken of een stevige kop koffie bij, want we gaan behoorlijk de diepte in. En ik hoop dat je aan het eind helemaal bent bijgepraat over dat rare volkje aan de andere kant van het kanaal.
So, Jack, who are you and what organization are you part of?
I'm chair of the Provisional Central Committee of the Communist Party of Great Britain. I've been in politics since I was about 13. But yeah, so I regularly write in the Weekly Worker. So I think that sums me up.
Okay. So let's, you've been over for a meeting in the Netherlands, so that gives us the opportunity to ask you about Brexit, among other things. So what about Brexit? What is happening over there? Could you give an overview from your point of view, from the point of view of a communist?
Well, I have to confess, when it first happened, i.e. the vote, it was extremely narrow, and my reaction to it was, it's still not going to happen. It's just not going to happen, because they had these red lines, which meant no free movement from Europe in terms of labour, but no hard border in terms of Ireland. And those two just do not go together. So Theresa May could have said Brexit means Brexit, but it couldn't. So in terms of her troubles in Parliament, that didn't surprise me whatsoever. It was just so predictable, because you had a majority in the House of Commons that had campaigned against Brexit. What was sort of skillful, I suppose, about the right-wing press is getting all parties to the 2017 general election to commit themselves to the result of that referendum. But really, what the Labour Party was proposing is what we call a Brino, Brexit in name only. I mean, whatever they say about free movement, the reality is they would have accepted it in the interests of the economy. The Lib Dems, well, they're now actually opposed to Brexit, but they would have gone with some Brino. Theresa May's deal in reality was Brino. So her fall didn't surprise me. But then when you take Boris Johnson, the new Prime Minister, and his negotiating tactics, I must admit I was half impressed by the right-wing revolutionism on display, reactionary revolutionism. So I'm now much more, I don't know what the hell is going to happen in terms of Brexit. It still might not happen, because obviously we've got a general election. It could produce you a surprise result. That wouldn't surprise me. On the other hand, Johnson could get his majority, and then, we'll see some sort of Brexit. Clearly, there's loads of negotiations yet to happen, but the orientation of Boris Johnson seems to be towards some sort of transatlantic alignment away from Europe. That seems
towards
to be
Washington.
Towards United States, yeah.
Okay. Which is some idea of going back to the the good times of Britannia ruling the waves?
No, I don't think so. There are some that talk about British Empire too, but you have to say that's laughable.
Yeah.
No, this is Britain staying what it's been like internationally since at least 1956. This is when Britain and France invaded Egypt along with Israel in the name of keeping Israel and Egypt apart. Yeah. It was a sort of peacemaking operation. It was rubbish. It was an invasion.
About the Suez Canal.
It was the Suez Canal. Up to then, Britain had ambitions to be the third power, to rebuild its empire, to expand its empire in the Middle East and expand its empire in Africa. They knew they had to give up India. That was impossible to keep. But in the Middle East and in Africa, they thought they could actually expand. They thought they could be the third power, so they developed their own nuclear bomb independently of the United States. But when they had the invasion of Egypt, the United States basically turned round and said, if you carry on with that, we'll do the pound. We'll pull the plug. Britain was so weak economically, it couldn't resist. So although it took them some time to withdraw troops, it had definitively, subordinated itself to the United States. It knew it didn't have any independent role of the United States. So what it famously, I think it was Dean Rusk, who was the American Secretary of State, I think of that time, said that Britain's lost an empire but not yet found a role. And it was America that pushed it in the direction of Europe. Previously, Britain had been supportive of European unity, but it thought itself above it. Why should we bother with Europeans? We're a world power. So it was America that pushed it in the direction of the common market, or whatever it was called at the time. And de Gaulle recognised that. That's why he blocked British membership, because he said Britain will be a Trojan horse, which is how it's proved. So in that sense, given Trump at least, and who knows how long he will last, given that he's against European integration, clearly Britain is following, not quite orders, but Brexit for Britain isn't madness in terms of the ruling class.
Right. Okay, so to summarize that broad history of the last 60 years, the role of Britain went from colonial empire towards a role in being part of Europe, but not being part of Europe, so to speak.
It was America's presence in Europe, if you want to put it like that, and the fact that it's aligned closely with America allows the City of London to be what it is, a huge, extractor of surplus on a global scale, only equivalent to New York, but in proportionate terms, it is the global capital of capital.
It might help to spell out this geopolitical landscape a bit. London is London, not the city of London, it's the city of London because it is allowed as a financial center by American hegemony. That is basically the long and short of it. But in exchange, the Americans expect a permanent Trojan horse, as you put it.
That's what they expected, that's what they got. So it was Britain amongst those that were at the forefront of pushing for the expansion of Europe to the east. So Britain, i.e. the Americans, they went against their agreement with Gorbachev. They said that NATO wouldn't expand to the east, and it has. I don't know if this will...
No, it's fine. Okay, so, and the reason, just to spell it out, is to prevent too much European integration, to prevent a European state from forming as a competitor towards America.
You could imagine a Europe consisting of Western Europe, Netherlands, Belgium, France, obviously Germany, maybe Spain and Portugal, coming together.
Yeah.
They're economically or close enough or sufficiently small to be absorbed, to be lifted up by Germany.
Right.
But once you start talking about Romania, Bulgaria, Poland, it's a different level. And so what Britain was responsible for is the expansion of Europe, but blocking the deepening of Europe. And that's how it saw its role.
Right.
So in terms of Germany, that sort of suited it economically, but not politically. Economically, it could export cars, machinery, import workers, but politically, the project of ever deeper unity, I think, was blocked.
Which is, of course, causing all kinds of contradictions in that sense. But it is now, begging the question maybe, what would now be the role of Britain after Brexit, if Brexit happen? I mean, you talked about Johnson looking towards a transatlantic partnership, but, to put it bluntly, what use does Washington have to keep London allowing to be the national centre in this part of the world?
Well, they've got to have somewhere. I mean, in terms of the global market, because it moves so fast, actually having this time zone actually suits, because given how they've divided time, it can trade efficiently west and east. Right. So people are up and they're around. Also, you have the great advantage of British hegemony being replaced by American hegemony, i.e. the Anglosphere. So language matters. So in terms of traders, there's a phrase, I can't know exactly what it's called, but MYLON. I don't know how you would spell that, but New York, London. It sort of forms a sort of unity. I don't know how long it takes to get to the other side of the Atlantic, but it's the most used route. And so, in terms of American companies operating globally, they want a London base. They like living in London. The private schools, what we call public schools, suit them very well. The lifestyle in London is sort of familiar to them. So I think the Johnson plan would be a deregulated Britain.
Okay.
And this is something they agreed not to do in terms of their agreement with Tusk and Juncker. But it's been leaked since then. That's exactly what they are planning to do. Now, how they can get away with that's a different question. So the plan would be you deregulate the labour market further, you deregulate as far as you can in order to become a competitor to Europe. So Europe has high standards, Britain will have low standards. It can still trade through World Trade Organization rules. That seems to be the idea.
Because in, at least Dutch media, there has been quite a bit of discussion, speculation, hopes maybe, that a lot of capital based in London will come to Amsterdam. Most of it, whatever has moved towards Europe, has gone to Frankfurt, towards the European Central Bank and the financial district over there. So what is London still going to be that significant in the future if this is going to keep going on?
Well, I rely on the Financial Times, which is the business paper in Britain, for my information on this. And certainly until recently, I think the opinion would have been by people like myself who aren't in the core of it, so to speak, that, there would be a significant outflow of personnel, banks and capital to various parts of the EU. But what seems to have happened is that they've located or set up various small headquarters in various European locations, Frankfurt, Paris, Dublin. Also, I don't know about Amsterdam, but so various places in order to allow them to continue to trade. But actually what's happened is the number of jobs in banking in the City of London has actually grown, not shrunk. So yes, they've exported some jobs, so the number of jobs that have gone out, but they've been more than compensated, bizarrely you might say, by the prospect of more and better business for the City of London. So as I say, the employment in the City of London, and we're talking about bankers, not cleaners, has actually grown and is expected to grow.
Well, those kind of numbers, I think, are small. I don't know what numbers are.
I think we're talking about maybe 50,000 jobs being exported, which is not nothing.
Not nothing.
But given, I don't know how many people work in the city, but you might be talking about 100,000, something like that.
So it's not nothing, but not a huge
But then, as I say, the numbers actually in the city have grown. So yes, people have been moved abroad, but yeah, the actual numbers that they're employing has actually expanded.
All right. But more importantly, capital has mostly remained in London.
Well, in terms of we're talking about banking capital, finance capital, yes. On the other hand, I think the general expectation is that when it comes to industrial capital, then that will be the hit. We have a car industry. I don't know how many cars it produces, but it produces a lot of cars.
Right.
Mainly for export to Europe, as well as the home market. None of these are British-owned. They're German, they're French, they're American. I can't keep up sometimes with the amount of mergers that are happening, but also Japanese. So when the Japanese put their workers on short-time working, or when they say they're not going to expand this or that plant, the management say this has got nothing to do with Brexit. No one can take that seriously. Clearly Brexit, it's everything to do with Brexit and the fact that the Europeans, i.e. the EU, have done a trade deal with Japan. So the reason why the Japanese opened up in Britain was skilled workforce, from their point of view, good trade union laws, i.e. restrictive trade union laws, and also access to Europe. Those factors now have changed, and I would expect most British car jobs to go. And one can carry on down the list with steel and other such areas of work,
Because of dropping back towards World Trade Organization standards instead
of... Well, but also because there's a deal done between Japan and the EU that no longer make Britain an advantage. So you can now make cars in Japan, export them to Europe, but also what's happening on a global scale with the car industry is the shift from the internal combustion engine to electric power, and apparently that takes... That needs economies of scale. And so therefore the Japanese are consolidating their industry in Japan, but they've done a deal with the EU.
Okay, so a certain kind of deprecation is going on and new investments are needed, and it makes sense to do them in Japan in this case. But other industries like Airbus, for example, for people listening not knowing, Airbus has several plants throughout the European Union. Some making the wings, some making the engines, some making the computers, blah, blah, blah. I believe in the UK it's the engines.
It's the engines plus something else.
Something else.
Certainly it's the engines,
So that's not really a workable relationship going on, I suppose.
I haven't got a clue on that. All you can say is that Airbus was one of the companies that has openly come out warning about Brexit. A lot of other companies have been a lot more circumspect, quiet about it. But Airbus, yes, has threatened that, we can move manufacture to Spain. What that means in terms of Rolls-Royce engines, again, that's beyond me. I haven't read anything that tells me Rolls-Royce will cease being British, simply because it's, as well as having a civilian arm, it has a military arm. So...
It might change in nature, but not quite go out of business. And other aspects like medicines running out, food deliveries. I mean, Britain is in contrast to the Netherlands, being the second exporter of food in the world. Britain is mostly importing its food. So what is your judgment on that relationship?
If there was
is Armageddon going to happen?
No. If there was a no-deal Brexit, in terms of the immediate transition, there could easily be chaos here or there.
Right.
But it doesn't look like there'll be a no-deal Brexit. This is one of the threats of Johnson. So one would expect it to be smooth, but in terms of British workers, you would expect them to have to pay higher prices.
Right.
That's what you would expect.
The reason I'm asking that is the rise of Johnson, for me, was quite unexpected. So it does show some kind of... the Tories appear to have put themselves in between a rock and a hard place via, mostly stupidity, in my opinion. And Johnson appears to have come up using a kind of desperation going on within the ranks of the Tories, because it appears they don't really have a clue of what is going on and how to go forward. So a no-deal Brexit is very feasible, and I think it might very well happen. So that might have
I don't think a no-deal Brexit will happen.
No.
Simply because they've now agreed.
Okay.
And so Johnson is now in the middle of a general election campaign with the pledge that he needs a majority in the House of Commons to push that deal through. Who knows what the result will be. Okay. But if he wins, which is a big if, then there will be this deal, which will basically shove Northern Ireland out to somewhere else, economically, but crucially politically. But no, if you go back to my earlier remarks, it might appear to be madness. But if you're the number 2 global imperialist power, and you rely on your number 2 position because of your puppy status or your poodle status to the number 1 imperialist power, it makes a certain sense. So in terms of post-1956, this isn't madness. It's got elements of it, but then so's Trump. But again, I think there's a rationality within Trump. In terms of Johnson, I think once David Cameron lost that referendum, I put forward the idea, there's 3 possible candidates: Theresa May, Michael Gove, Boris Johnson. And given Theresa May's failure to deliver Brexit, it was more or less inevitable that Boris Johnson would win a Tory contest for leader. He is massively popular amongst the Tory rank and file. So it's quite a small party now. It used to be about 1 million. Now it's about 150,000, and that's been people joining it in order to vote for Boris Johnson. So I don't know what his margin was, but it was crushing. And it was always going to be crushing. So there was no doubt that Boris Johnson was going to win. The real question was he going to go for a no Brexit, or was he going to negotiate something? And it was only at the very, very end that we got this deal, which was very similar, actually, to Theresa May's deal. But yeah, he didn't have the parliamentary arithmetic to push it through. He lost the Democratic Unionist Party in Northern Ireland. That was obvious. But yeah, there isn't a majority in the House of Commons for that sort of deal, full stop, hence the general election.
Okay. Before we go full steam ahead on that topic, just one more issue that shouldn't be ignored on the topic of Brexit, which is, you have been alluding to it, Northern Ireland. The whole backstop deal is somewhat confusing to many listeners. So what was that about again?
This is about the deal that they did in 1998 to stop the so-called Troubles.
The Good Friday deal.
The Good Friday Agreement, yeah. And what this allowed is some sort of constitutional recognition of dual identity in Northern Ireland. But also what it did, is it institutionalised sectarianism. So parties stand either as unionist parties or nationalist parties, Catholic parties. The whole constitutional structure is designed that way. So if you have a first minister who's from the Protestant side, you have to have a deputy from the Catholic side, and all the way down in terms of ministers. But also what this guaranteed is two things. One, a border poll. If there was a clear majority in the north, there would be a poll about getting rid of the border, reuniting Ireland. Meanwhile, there would be some Southern Irish involvement in running Northern Ireland, but crucially, an open border. This was facilitated by the fact that both parts are in the EU, but if there was a peace deal, then you could have free movement, because they're no longer trying to stop guns coming in and people fleeing south.
This was on that agreement.
This is the Good Friday Agreement.
Okay. So I don't recall that poll ever happening?
No, because there's no clear majority in the north for reunification. Because what you've got since 1921, they hope, is an inbuilt Protestant majority. Things look a bit different now because Catholics are having slightly more children. So there is an increasing balance between the two populations. And certainly Sinn Féin has been banking on Northern Ireland Catholic women having just slightly more children in order to tip the balance. Now, maybe this deal, this is also what they're hoping, that sort of shoves Northern Ireland out of the British sort of customs field and leaves it in the EU customs field, that maybe some Protestants will vote for Irish reunification under those circumstances, because the British regard us with contempt. Why be administered from London? I don't know. That's not impossible, though.
But given that, demographic time bomb going on, ticking, wouldn't that eventually just restart the troubles should the reunification happen, but then from the other side, from the unionist side? I mean, it's not really going to the essence of the topic, which I think would be a certain kind of self-determination, equal rights, stuff like that. That is not going to be discussed. Maybe to ask a second question related to that is Northern Ireland, is society in Belfast or Derry, has that really changed since 1998?
No, it's... other than if you go to the centre of the cities, the centre of the cities look like any other British European city. You know, the same bloody shops, the same bars, the same fashions.
Same McDonald's.
Everything looks the same. Except once you go to where people live, then you go, cripes, what a place have I entered. So if you go to a unionist area, all you need to do is look at the murals on the walls, and you'll have UDA, Ulster Defence Association, fighters with Kalashnikovs or whatever guns they happen to have. The paving stones are painted red, white and blue. There are Union Jacks everywhere. And if you're Catholic, you fear to actually go into those areas. You actually fear, right? Amongst those two populations, they somehow know who you are. And there are two questions. They don't need to even ask, are you a Catholic or are you a Protestant? So what school do you go to? It would be something like that. They know. But also what happened is they built peace walls. So you can go from one street down the road and suddenly you're confronted with a 25-foot piece of corrugated iron that goes on and separates the two communities. Physically separates them. So they not only go to separate schools, they can't mix unless they go to the centre of town. So they're physically separated, but also constitutionally, you have to vote. Well, you basically vote for Catholic, Protestant parties. And now, the only exception to that has been the left and crucially something called the Alliance Party, which in reality is a unionist party, but didn't want to officially register as such. But the constitution is divided on the basis that if the DUP come top of the poll, they get the first minister. If Sinn Féin comes second, they get the deputy minister. And you go down, the whole structure of parties is designed on that basis.
Constitutional arrangement. Like
exactly. It institutionalised sectarianism, yeah.
It's okay.
Just let me also come back on your what if. If there was a border poll and it went the way of Sinn Féin. Who knows? Who knows? It's possible you could get some sort of right-wing resistance. On the other hand, we do have the examples in front of us of South Africa. The whites didn't, apart from some fringe groups, even dream of taking up arms. We have the example of the white Algerians. They didn't. Once France abandoned them, to all intents and purposes, they gave up. They turned to terrorism in France, but to all intents and purposes, the struggle in Algeria was over. If they didn't have France to back them, that was it. And I think that's true with the Ulster Protestants, that if they didn't have Britain behind them, then they don't have a chance. So if we go back in history, the Tories actually backed the Ulster Unionists against the Liberal Party who wanted home rule for Ireland. They actually rebelled. They were armed with 40,000 rifles, with Tory party connivance, and with the connivance of the High Command of the British Army. Right? So there was something called the Curragh Mutiny, and this is basically the Tories as an opposition party, plus the British Army High Command threatening civil war if there was Irish home rule. And I don't think that would happen now. That's the point.
Right. Well,
I could be wrong.
The EU didn't exist at that point in time.
I could be wrong. Yeah.
All right. But maybe to close off that question, to that topic, does Sinn Féin have the programmatic thinking going on that they need to reach out towards Protestant parts of the population should that happen? Should they get a majority?
Well, the answer to that is yes, except that if you take Sinn Féin, it will appeal electorally specifically to its community. And that's what you get on the other side. So you get gestures along those lines. But the reality is that the divisions politically are hardening, not lessening.
Okay.
So in terms of Protestant voters, what's happened is that they've moved to a harder position. And the same has happened with Catholic voters. So originally Sinn Féin was the second party amongst Catholic voters. It then replaced an organisation called the Social Democratic Labour Party. On the Protestant side, the Ulster Unionist Party, which is this historic party of Ulster Unionism going way back, that was replaced by the Democratic Unionist Party, which was a sort of streetist, petty bourgeois, nowadays we'd call it right populist party, but viciously anti-Catholic.
Yeah. Strange religious and right-wing politics.
Totally.
Populist.
Yeah.
All right. Then let's move on with the general elections coming up. But that's next month, I believe, isn't it?
Next month, yeah.
Next month. So Johnson got his wish. What are the prospects regarding the general elections? I mean, most listeners will know, of course, of the first past the post system. The two main parties, the Liberals being the third, Greens being a smaller fourth, irrelevant mostly. So, what is the dynamics going on over there?
I would say this is the most unpredictable general election in Britain, perhaps ever. It's true that Boris Johnson has, in terms of opinion polls, a lead over the Labour Party. On the other hand, in the last general election, Theresa May had a lead of 20%, and in the course of the campaign, that was completely eaten away, and they ended up with 2% more than the Labour Party. So it's not inconceivable that the Labour Party could catch up with Boris Johnson. That's one factor. So whether that happens or not is a different question. But the joker in the pact is the Brexit Party. And because Boris Johnson did the deal he did, as opposed to go for a no-deal Brexit, this has given the Brexit Party new wind in its sails. So previously I would have said a general election, clearly Boris Johnson wants it. He can then pitch his political agenda to the 51% that voted leave. That's a solid block because no one else is challenging it. He can scoop it all up. He can just get rid of the Brexit Party and other such organisations because here I'm going for the deal that you want, no argument.
And just to clarify, the Brexit Party is the new party formed by Nigel Farage?
Nigel Farage's party. Yeah. 3 members, 150,000 registered supporters. That's where politics are going. He doesn't want democracy. He doesn't want the bother of conferences or anything nuisance like that.
That'll sound familiar to many.
I'm sure it does. Right. Yeah. It's where I think various politics are going. Okay, so we now have a situation, because we have first past the post, of where the Brexit Party might win no MPs. That's quite conceivable. It'd be quite surprising if it did. On the other hand, it could take away Boris Johnson's victory, because instead of having a 2-way contest in a constituency, you could have a 3-way, and we could just carry on.
Basically splitting the Tory vote.
Splitting the Brexit vote, splitting the Tory vote, exactly. So, under those circumstances, you could actually find Labour, although it might only win, say, 30% or 35%, you could conceivably, under those circumstances, find itself with a majority in Parliament. So, but then, I don't know. Who knows?
Okay, that's interesting. Just to come back towards the Tory party, you were just explaining how they've changed. They have changed, and the Tory party has been the traditional party of capital, of the ruling class, of the elite, but the elites have mostly pulled back financial support over this Brexit issue, because the bourgeoisie, the actual elites, have no interest in Brexit, are not interested in all of that. So that is one of the topics why the Tories appear to be somewhat in a turmoil internally. So what is going on over there?
Well, you can read articles in the Financial Times by leading ex-Tories, people associated with business, asking exactly the same question. What the hell is going on with our party? We used to have a reliable party of business. We no longer have a reliable party of business. I think 2 things really have happened. One, they changed the law about the financing of political parties, so that big business, in terms of corporate business, finds it a lot more difficult to give to political parties. So they don't tend to. So what you get is maverick billionaires or maverick millionaires. They tend to give. But the big banks don't do it anymore, the breweries don't do it anymore, the car industry doesn't do it anymore. And also what's happened, of course, is that the British capitalist class is increasingly not British. So ownership of big industrial capital is increasingly located abroad. So British Steel is owned by India. Jaguar, I think, is owned by BMW, i.e. German capital. And one can just carry on. Right. And indeed, if we take the British press, the biggest circulation paper is owned by an American-Australian. The biggest circulation paper in London, the Evening Standard, is owned by an expat Russian. And one can just carry on down the list.
Right.
So increasingly, the British capitalist class doesn't have the same relationship to the Tory party that it did, because it has itself changed and the rules have changed. And international capital or capital that's based in Japan doesn't want to be seen to be interfering in British elections. Right? Same with American capital, same with European capital. So yeah, in that sense, the Tory party, to use a French word, is Poujadist. He was a character in the 50s that sort of led a petty bourgeois rebellion. In that sense, yeah, the Tory party is more a party of petty bourgeois protest or petty bourgeois rage now than it's ever been. Previously, you had a rank and file in the Tory party who were head-banging right-wing nuts, but they had no power. So it's only recently that they've chosen the leader through some poll of the rank and file. First of all, true, they have to have a poll amongst MPs, but previously a Tory party leader would emerge. No one exactly knew how or where from. Tory party leaders were chosen by what they used to call men in grey suits, the elite, who no one actually knew who was choosing and how or why. So a Tory party leader would emerge. In the present era, that's sort of unacceptable. So they sort of conceded. And in that sense, I think they've lost control. So, yeah, there is a definite loss of control by the British capitalist class over the future of Britain.
Okay, and going towards the Labour Party, say they will win the elections, they get a majority in Parliament. Will Labour being in power be able to change anything? I mean, regarding Brexit, but also regarding their own programme, of course.
Well, again, we're into I don't damn well know territory. No, seriously, because, okay, in terms of the Labour Party, the majority of MPs will still be, unless there's a complete landslide towards Labour, the majority of Labour MPs will be hostile to Corbyn. The majority of them are on the right. They would call themselves moderates. I would call them pro-capitalist, right? So have they reconciled themselves to Corbyn? Absolutely not. In the last election, Corbyn clearly was the main factor of why the Labour Party did so well. Who knows this time? But imagine the Labour Party does well. Corbyn will have to take most credit for that. Okay, so Labour Party ends up in a majority. In the British Constitution, it's the monarch that chooses the Prime Minister. Now, the monarch chooses the Prime Minister on advice, and on advice of something we have called the Privy Council, which is leading ex-ministers, leading politicians. So Jeremy Corbyn is a member of the Privy Council, but the Privy Council will be dominated by right-wing forces. Now, it's not beyond the realms of imagination, and it has happened in British history before, that the monarch turns around and says, instead of the leader of the biggest party, even a party with a majority, she or he could turn round and has turned round and says, no, I think so-and-so, so-and-so actually will command a majority in the House of Commons for their programme. So it's conceivable that that would happen. Now, when I've raised that possibility with comrades on the left, they laugh, because basically so much of the left in Britain, as everywhere else, is economistic, and they think that the bourgeoisie follows the rules. Well, these are the rules, actually. But they think that if that happens, they say, oh, there'll be a revolution, which is when I laugh. No, it's when I laugh, because I say, well, where are your guns? Where are your army regiments? And
well, with revolution, most people on the left mean a picket line or precisely. A demonstration, or
there will undoubtedly be demonstrations. The point about demonstrations is you have your demonstration, then you go back home. I agree. Of course there'll be demonstrations. Of course there'll be anger. How sustained that anger would be, that's impossible to say. And what happens to those Labour MPs that form this government? I mean, again, this is all taking us into the realms of I don't damn well know.
Yeah.
So these are all possibilities.
Mostly of fairylands.
Well, you say that, but precisely what you've got is an American administration that when Trump was over here last, his Secretary of State, when he was asked about a Jeremy Corbyn government, said we will have to push back against that. Right? In Britain, we have a famous novel written by an ex-Labour minister, a guy called Chris Mullen, and it was called A Very British Coup. And it's sort of a Corbyn scenario. And in his scenario, the Prime Minister, i.e. the sort of Corbyn figure, was mysteriously retired. He got ill. Well, again, all we know is when Corbyn became Labour leader, various serving generals, not ex-generals, people who weren't named, but they made themselves known to the leading right-wing paper in Britain, the Daily Telegraph. So we suddenly had stories from leading generals saying they would not follow orders from Jeremy Corbyn. Right? We've had leading people in the security service, which is called MI5, Military Intelligence 5, who say, well, Jeremy Corbyn will have to sack his advisors if he wants to become Prime Minister. His advisors are, I can name them, Andrew Murray, Seamus Milne. These are people that used to be supporters of a faction in the official Communist Party, pro-Moscow faction in the Communist Party. These are people that MI5 has been spying on, right? They've also been spying on Jeremy Corbyn.
No.
To have someone like that who's been considered historically a security risk, the Prime Minister, is unacceptable for the security service. Big business. Well, will there be a run on the pound? Almost certainly. Because foreign capitalists, British capitalists will say, let's get our money out.
Yeah. Let's go to Frankfurt.
Let's go to Frankfurt. Let's go anywhere. So we don't know. All I would say is that if they do allow Corbyn to carry out his programme, the chances are Corbyn will turn out to be very moderate. And I'm saying that not to reassure the capitalist class. I'm saying that to warn the working class. Because those in the Labour Party, at a rank and file level, there's clearly an overwhelming majority in support of Corbyn. He won by 60%. I think now, if there was another leadership contest, he'd win by more than that.
So that immediately brings me to my last question, which is the position of the left regarding Labour, inside, outside Labour. How should the left, the far left, relate to these kinds of questions? How should it go into the elections, for example?
I think the left, I think with maybe mad sort of total fringe groups I haven't even heard of type thing. The left will vote Corbyn, the left will vote Labour, the left will campaign for people to vote Labour. I think across the board. I don't think there's any exception. On the other hand, what you've got is a tendency to look at Labour's programme and describe it in terms of it being radical or even socialist. And I think that's stupid. Because all Labour's proposing to do is renationalise a bit of this and a bit of that, pass some reasonable-ish, moderate reforms, and very little else. Its programme actually is not radical. Its programme is actually moderate. And precisely the problem is that given all I've just been talking about American pushback, the danger of the army, the danger of the secret state, the danger of the monarch, the left is completely unequipped to even think about such questions, because what they think about is demonstrations, pay strikes, and that's what politics consist of for them. So they don't think about the House of Lords, they don't think about the monarch, they don't think about the demand that goes back to bourgeois radicals of disbanding standing armies, which is a historic thing in Britain going back to our glorious revolution of 1688. So all of that is foreign to our left. In terms of, you raised the question inside, outside the Labour Party. The Labour Party, when it was formed, was half a party, half a trade union confederation. It was Kautsky and Lenin that presided over the entry of the Labour Party into the Second International. And they basically said, well, here's a peculiar sort of party. It consists of trade unions. It's got no individual membership, but also consists of socialist societies. So we'll have it in, and we hope that it evolves in the correct direction. Well, we all know what happened to the Second International. But the Labour Party did contain the Social Democratic Federation when it was formed, and it also contained the British Socialist Party when it was formed, and that was the organisation that went on to form the Communist Party of Great Britain. So historically, the Labour Party has always had a left. Historically, the Labour right has fought to get rid of the communists, right? But there's been a left in there. And so the left has a choice: either break the rules and be in the Labour Party, or be good little boys and stay out of the Labour Party. And there's been a choice over history of being in and being out. In my view, it's correct to have members in the Labour Party. And it's correct to have a perspective not of being in the Labour Party to steal a few cadre, to split, i.e. an interest operation, that Trotsky recommended, but no, to have a long-term perspective of transforming the Labour Party back to what it was, which we would describe as, using the words of Trotsky to describe the Soviets, of united fronts of a special kind. United fronts because it unites the various factions, parties of the working class, but not temporarily, as recommended by the Third and Fourth Congresses of Comintern. So a permanent united front that unites the factions and organisations of the working class. But our perspective would be to purge the right, purge the pro-capitalist right. Either they walk or we kick them out. Yeah. That would be our perspective. But the left should be in the Labour Party alongside mass trade unions, which is what the mass trade unions are affiliated today to the Labour Party. The left needs to be in there and fighting, not for Corbyn's programme, but for a Marxist programme.
Right. A left organisation that many people have heard of over here is Momentum, which was crucial in campaigning for Corbyn and getting Corbyn elected and being in the position he is now. So as Momentum having lots of supporters in a position to be in a fruitful position here to make steps forward.
Momentum actually was formed after Corbyn won as leader.
Okay.
It was formed on the basis of lists of people who said, I want to support Jeremy Corbyn's election campaign. And it was after that, after he got 60% victory first round, that they formed this thing, Momentum. And it was a great idea. I can't remember how many members it had, but let's say 40,000. I met loads more people on its list, but say 40,000, which isn't bad at all. So what was happening is local groups were formed. Local groups were coming together on a regional basis. There was a London Momentum. There were borough Momentums. This looked really promising. And the left, in terms of the Labour Party, was in there, fighting each other in a healthy way, I would say. Sometimes unhealthy, but in general, to clash and to work out different programmes. This is the way forward. No, that's the way forward.
Talking politics.
That's healthy.
Yeah.
And so, we had all sorts of arguments, and we were very supportive. I think anyone who wasn't supportive would be stupid. But then what happened is what we call the Landsman coup. And this is the guy that was the leading personality setting it up, John Landsman. He was a member of the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party. That's the governing committee of the Labour Party. He was elected by the constituencies. They have different components electing the NEC. Anyway, he said, what we're going to do is have a much more democratic constitution. But when you looked at it, it actually meant basically one-man rule. And what was disgraceful about it is that he was able to send out recommendations to vote for his constitution from Jeremy Corbyn's closest allies. So we all had letters coming into our inbox from John McDonnell, the Shadow Chancellor, from Diane Abbott, the Shadow Home Secretary, all people associated with Corbyn. In other words, the message was, and it was clearly true, Corbyn backs this change. The change went through, and what happened is, as an organisation that anyone had any hopes in, basically it died. And it became a vehicle for careerists. And therefore it shriveled. So in some areas it continues, but like, I'm just making this one up, but somewhere town, the left will be united in momentum.
Right.
On the other hand, also what's happened, because of this control freakery and because of this careerism, is in lots of areas the left has reconstituted itself separate from momentum. What's happened in terms of choosing election candidates for this forthcoming general election, because Labour didn't put in its mechanism of rank and file control early enough, and because the general election was called at very little notice, is they basically, in terms of empty constituencies, they've divided it up between the trade unions, and a number of trade unions. So Unite Trade Union will get so many seats. GMB Union will get so many seats for its people. On the other hand, Momentum will get so many seats.
Okay.
And so there's been a bureaucratic stitch-up, and these candidates have been imposed on local constituencies. So they have no choice about who their candidate is. Anyway, so Momentum is a shell of its former self. It can still choose who the left will vote for when it comes to NEC elections. But also what's happened is precisely because there's so much disaffection, there's been moves, but none of them have worked yet to challenge Momentum. Clearly, the majority of the left don't back Momentum anymore. We all know from different factions and different whatevers that Momentum cannot serve our purposes.
Right. There's no new initiative going on.
There have been initiatives. There have been. The most notable one is something that we would support, called Labour Left Alliance, and that's united various local groups. But I'm not that hopeful at the moment. The left lacks courage. The left doesn't know what is important to it. A lot of the left would say any Labour government is better than no Labour government. I disagree. So yeah, a lot of them want to be Corbyn fan club types. But there are others that are saying, no, we've got our own politics and we need to organise around those politics. We'll support Corbyn to the extent that he's supportable, but we'll criticise him. We'll oppose him if he needs opposing. I would support that sort of left.
Well, we are hitting about an hour now, so I think we've discussed a lot in that hour. Are there any recommendations you want to give to comrades? Refer people to websites or
read The Weekly Worker.
All right,
that's it. Good.
Thank you.
Great stuff.